Welcome back. We want to take a few minutes to talk about planning and preparing for calculating your Scope 3 footprint, and we'll use Apex and Formula Pharma as an example. So the first step in getting ready for your Scope 3 footprinting process is to define your business goals. You likely developed your business goals when you did your Scope 1 and 2 footprint, but it's important to consider any different or new business goals you may have for Scope 3. This is important for making your case to get the resources needed to develop your footprint and also for identifying how granular your footprint needs to be. Additionally, by defining these goals early, you can begin to think about how you can present the findings of your Scope 3 emissions calculations to the stakeholders either internally or externally around your organization. In our example of Formula Pharma, they started developing their Scope 3 footprint because they wanted to understand their supply chain as well as isolate potential operational issues that they identified in their Scope 1 and 2 footprint. You'll need to think about what these business goals are for your own organization. Next, you'll need to think about who from your team is going to help you with these calculations. Footprinting requires collecting data from many parts of your company, and you'll want to have those people on your team when you're getting ready to start footprinting. The team that you'll work with here is likely to be a little bit different than your Scope 1 and 2 teams, although there will likely be some level of overlap. If you're joining in on this course with other stakeholders in your organization, those team members may make up the foundation of your footprinting team, but you may also need to engage others in your organization and outside of your organization who might not be registered in this course. They can help you collect the data required to calculate your Scope 3 emissions. You can see the examples on the screen here of your procurement or finance teams who could help you with purchases that will likely make up your purchase goods and services and capital goods emissions. Your facilities or operations teams, you probably leveraged for Scope 1 and 2, but there are some categories that will likely be relevant to them in Scope 3 as well. Your engineering teams may have insights. Your sustainability teams will probably play a big role in your footprinting, and so it'll be important to engage them. Depending on your organizational structure, your environmental health and safety teams could play a big role, especially when thinking about facilities management and operations. You'll also potentially want to work with stakeholders and suppliers because they may have better information on your supply chain emissions than you have within your internal organization. And lastly, you'll also potentially want to engage leaders and have an executive sponsor to help build awareness and interest in these topics to make sure that you can make the progress that you need to. In the example of Apex, you can see that they formed a cross-functional greenhouse gas inventory team with core members from a number of these teams, as well as engaged some of their biggest suppliers. Another thing that you'll need to do, if you haven't already, is set your organizational boundary. As a reminder, your organizational boundary determines which emissions are allocated to your Scope 1 and 2 footprint versus someone else's. This step helps ensure that your footprint is relevant and complete and prevents double counting of greenhouse gas emissions. Emissions within your organizational boundary fall into your Scope 1 and 2 footprint, and any emissions outside of your organizational boundary will likely fall into Scope 3. Many companies in the healthcare sector take the operational control approach for setting an organizational boundary, and that means that they include all emissions for the facilities and assets they have operational control over in their Scope 1 and 2 footprint. As a reminder, operational control means that you have the power to control operating policies at a facility, such as being able to decide when people work there, when the lights are turned on, or how the building is run. This means it doesn't matter if you necessarily lease or own a building or whether it's part of a joint venture, but what mostly matters is whether you control the operations of what's happening in that building. For many companies, operational control and financial control are equivalent, but generally speaking, in your industry, many companies choose the operational control approach, which is aligned here with what our example company of Apex does. The last reminder I have for you today is about identifying the relevant upstream and downstream activities. For scope 3, this really will include indirect upstream and downstream emissions within your supply chain. Uh, and as discussed earlier, scope 1 includes direct emissions from your owned or controlled operations within a company. This could be something like your company facilities or your company transportation, anything that's owned or leased by your business that you have that operational control over. For scope 2, that's any indirect emissions from the consumption of purchased electricity, steam, heat, or cooling. And you should have considered both of these in your completion of your scope 1 and 2 footprint. The focus of our time together here is on your scope 3 emissions, which are generated from activities outside of your organizational boundary, but are a result of your own business activities. In our example of Formula Pharma, they began by developing a bulleted list of all of their relevant upstream and downstream activities related to production and delivery of sold products, and this will help them to begin categorizing and breaking down their scope 3 emissions categories. Thanks for tuning in.